Hello, this is Viv. Thank you for taking time to view and listen to my presentation. This presentation was originally given at the IDEA E7 conference in Limerick, Ireland in 2012. The theme at that conference was about contesting borders and boundaries, and we heard lots of international colleagues presenting cutting-edge research which sought to contest the boundaries between research theory and practice. In my presentation, I talked about a relatively simple idea in which a signature pedagogy from classroom drama might be used to infiltrate the territory of research practice. The pedagogy I'm talking about is teacher in role, a very recognised and widely used strategy within process drama, in which the teacher takes on a role in the drama to invite students into the fiction, stimulate improvisatory offers, and shift that power relationship. I really like the way Brian Edmiston talks about his use of drama, and he includes in that teacher in role. He says one of the core reasons why I as a teacher use drama is because when we create an imagined world, we can imagine that we frame events differently so that our power and authority relationships are changed. A long-term aim of mine as a teacher, as much as possible, is to share power and authority with students. I want students to have more opportunities to use words and deeds to act appropriately, but in ways that are not often sanctioned in classrooms. So building on the notion of teacher in role and its potential for shifting power, my presentation introduces, describes and discusses the idea of researcher in role, where the adult researcher takes a role in a classroom not for the purposes of teaching the students, but for the purposes of conducting learning conversations to collect data. Whilst this notion of research and role may sound rather obvious, and it may sound like something that's always been part of our practice, it's not something I've seen described explicitly in the research methods handbooks nor in the drama education research literature. And I want to suggest that it's time to name it as a strategy, both within our own field of drama research and for the wider context of classroom research. So in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about how researcher in role was used in my own research. I'm going to share data that was collected, compare the data that was collected by a researcher in role with that collected by a standard researcher, and attempt to theorise the whole thing through the lens of positioning theory. The project that I worked on, in which the strategy of researcher in role was developed, was a 2-year project called Connecting Curriculum, Connecting Learning, Negotiation and the Arts. It was funded by the New Zealand government through a fund called the TLRI, and the research was carried out over 2 years. It involved 4 university lecturers, researchers working in 5 schools in the Hamilton Bay of Plenty region of New Zealand, and our focus was on arts-based integration. This slide just gives you the background context of where the researcher in role strategy was developed. I'm not going to expand on the questions, methods or findings from the project here. They can be accessed from the TLRA website. But if you look at the final bullet point on this slide, you can see that 5 of the 7 teachers we worked with on this project chose to teach using the drama-based inquiry approach known as Mantle of the Expert. And it was in these classrooms that the researcher in role strategy appeared, although it was also used right across the project. So let's take a moment to look at what Mantle of the Expert is. As I said on the previous slide, I think it's quite important that the researcher in role strategy that I'm talking about emerged from the context of Mantle of the Expert. And I'm talking here about the full form version of Mantle of the Expert, the teaching approach or system devised by Dorothy Heathcote, which combines drama and inquiry. I'm not talking about the convention of Mantle of the Expert, or more correctly, role of the expert, which can be part of process drama. I don't want to use this presentation to talk about Mantle of the Expert at great length, but just to give a brief outline in case anybody's not sure, the core elements of Mantle of the Expert is that learning happens in role over extended periods, 6 to 12 weeks or longer. Teachers and students take on roles within a fictional company or enterprise or responsible team, working on a special job for a fictional client and encountering numerous challenges and tensions along the way. It's very important within Mantle of the Expert that teachers treat students at all times like competent adults. Drama conventions are used to explore issues from multiple perspectives, and role is used throughout. and it's cross-curricular. Some teachers, particularly at primary level, use Mantle of the Expert as their primary means of teaching the curriculum, maths and science and literacy and so on. And it's this context that the 5 teachers in our project were working, and it's in this context that the strategy of Researcher in Role developed. Just for a little more context, here are the lists of companies, clients and commissions that were used by the teachers in the project who chose to work in Mantle of the Expert. If you look at a couple of examples here, at the top you've got Year 5 to 6 students in role as visitor centres designers. In their drama, the client was the trust that runs a cave, Waitomo Cave Visitor Centre, and their commission was to design a new visitor centre for this place. At the bottom of the list, there are the archaeologists. We saw them in the opening photo on the slideshow. This group of Year 4 students spent a term in role as the Special Digging Company. That was their company name. Their client was the local preservation society, and their commission involved investigating taonga, or Māori treasures, uncovered at the building site that they were working at. So just to give the company, client and commission in each case doesn't adequately describe what goes on in the Mantle of the Expert classroom. This is a very elaborate and clever system in which drama meets inquiry in curriculum areas incorporated in quite a seamless way. And teacher in role is used throughout a Mantle of the Expert experience. So I think that gives, but I think the important thing for now is to give the atmosphere that was going on in these classes. Here were 150 plus children learning through role taking. Their teachers were taking on roles too every day and positioning the learners as experts with a particular commission to fulfill, and lots of tensions and problems were being solved within the learning conversations that evolved. And I think it was out of this atmosphere that the development of Researcher in Role really evolved. We wanted to find a way to hold learning conversations with the children in a way that walked the talk of the drama pedagogy that was being used in the classrooms. The research project involved conducting learning conversations with children we didn't know very well. 7 classrooms of them. We wanted to get, as researchers, we wanted to get their perspectives on what they were learning. In our pilot project, carried out 2 years prior, we'd done interviews with children. These had been successful, but also limited. And so this time, instead of interviewing children after the event, researchers decided that they were going to hold learning conversations during the lesson. And this is an established practice in which a researcher moves around chatting to students and taking notes on what is being said. Lucky for me, the other members of the research team were open to me trying this, to conduct these research conversations through role. And this is how it went. As you can see in this photo, this is me in role as Jane, a young apprentice, writing my application for work experience at the Special Digging Company, the archaeologists that we saw before. The children, and this kind of process was followed in every classroom that this Researcher in Role strategy was used. The children would be in one of their regular company meetings, in role as their specialised team, and they would be told that they'd received a letter. They were invited to look across at the effigy of the apprentice, in this case Jane, as she read the letter. Dear Special Digging Company, my name is Jane Parsons and I'm studying to become an archaeologist. I've heard a lot about your company. I especially admire the detailed work you do and the way you're so careful with cultural treasures. I was wondering whether it was possible for me to spend some time visiting your office and working alongside you so that I can learn more about what you do and improve my own skills. So children were invited to invite the researcher into role, into their drama. This is not to say that the children weren't aware of the presence of the researcher as researcher. They were. They'd previously been introduced to me as a researcher who was visiting, who was interested in their work. And in the usual classroom research situation, that would be the extent of the invitation. By inviting them also to accept me within the drama, I think we had a different level of informed consent. The role was clearly signalled to the students. There was no deceit here, but also the detail of what the researcher in role was looking for was also spelled out once again in the letter, where it says, I'm wondering if I could learn more about what you do and improve my own skills. And the other thing that goes on here, of course, is that the position of the researcher against the children is altered. Instead of coming in, so as it were, above the students and looking down at their work, the researcher is carefully positioned as apprentice, keen to learn from the students. And I think this is crucial. And so, duly signalled, the researcher in role, the researcher as apprentice in role, was invited to visit each of the classrooms in role as the responsible team or company. On several occasions, I was invited by students to present my CV, or I was subjected to a phone interview in which, my mettle or my suitability for coming to work with the company was tested. In doing so, I think we'd already negotiated a new kind of power relationship. And here you see me in role as Jane, the confused apprentice, working alongside the archaeologists and critically struggling to understand, and having the work of the company patiently explained by a more experienced colleague, i.e. one of the children in role. What this does to the research data, of course, is to change it completely. And here's one of the more interesting photos from the research. On the left is the researcher in role as apprentice, as seen in the previous photo. On the right is the more traditional researcher, another researcher from our team who didn't go into role and who just moved around the classroom carrying out a more traditional learning conversation data collection process. In 3 of the classrooms that we visited on our project, we were able to run these types of data collection side by side, and this is where it gets interesting. When we were data collecting for our original project, the interactions that were collected, the data that was collected in these conversations, was only coded for evidence of students' cross-curricular learning. We weren't interested initially at looking at the form or nature of the interactions or at the difference between what happens when you talk to a researcher in role compared to a researcher out of role. However, once the project was all done and dusted, I returned to the data with an interest in looking at the differences between these different interactions. So just to reiterate, in both cases, we were lucky because we had a big enough research team that in both cases the data could be written down and recorded. The researcher, the traditional researcher on the right, took her own notes as she was talking. The researcher in role as confused apprentice has another person behind her writing down notes on the interactions. And as soon as I compared the researcher in role transcripts with the researcher transcripts, I experienced one of those eureka moments in research. Very clear differences in the quality and nature of the interactions. Here are some samples of interactions to the researcher and to the researcher in role. And you can see, I think, that both examples tell the researcher about the children's learning. Both are useful and successful learning conversations, but they do have a strikingly different quality. In all cases here, these are Year 5-6 students. And these are just some examples, but as I say, the differences were really striking right across all transcripts. And that's not surprising, but it is interesting and perhaps useful. When I recoded this data and looked at instead of looking at what they were saying, but looking at how they were saying it, I concluded that to the researcher, children predominantly recall information and procedures. They say things such as, I find books about rocks and fossils. They present safe, whole understandings and talk in general terms. They say things like, we found out a lot about Stone Age man. They had some really weird animals. When they are asked about how they learn, children say things like, well, you read as much as you can and you look at where you find stuff and you check it, etc., which is a recount of the procedures of learning. So, in essence, I found that to the researcher, students were talking to an adult and they tended to describe the learning processes. In other words, tell them what they were doing. To the researcher in role, on the other hand, positioned as I was, as one to be initiated, as one who did not know, as apprentice, children were doing something rather different. They were still talking about their learning, but they seemed to share about what and how they were thinking. Their tone is to exhort and offer advice, like the fourth bullet, which was a statement made when I was enrolled as an apprentice museum designer. You've got to be in it, feel it, help them imagine, make it like real life. They also instruct and grapple with their own understandings out loud, like in the second bullet point when a member of the expert documentary team from one classroom explained to the researcher enrolled as apprentice how to create an interesting storyboard shot. The quote is quite long, but it's worth reading out. Different colours on an image, like create a different mood. If you change colour from black and white, you look at it differently, it changes the mood. Changing the positions of things, that would do it too. See, if you change this to black and white and had the horse turned away and in the top corner running in fear, you'd definitely read it differently. When you've been doing it as long as I have, it becomes an instinct. There's also a lovely sense of the playful in this quote, in that the student is demonstrating to the researcher that their understanding of the rules of the game, and sort of playfully acknowledging the power shift that has happened. This slide summarises what I consider to be the findings of this recoding of the data. It seems that researcher in role compels a certain kind of speech from the student. To the researcher, children offer what they are doing. To the researcher in role, they share what they are thinking. Even when that thinking is a bit rough around the edges, they share their grapplings to understand. They exhort, they advise, and the nature of the interaction is much more raw. Now, the education research literature abounds with researchers attempting to find ways to get children to talk like this. The Journal of Classroom Interaction has articles on the advantages of generating data by having students present to a naive audience, for example. They also present studies where researchers have explored pretending not to understand so that children will explain things to them. There was a significant science study, for example, where expert scientists, researchers, went into the classroom and pretended not to understand so that the children would explain things to them. To me, that has an element of deception and isn't truly informed consent, which researcher in role does get around. But as far as my searches have taken me in literature, no one has written about researcher in a role as a way of tapping into this urge to generate this kind of grappling and thinking data. All of which brings us to how we might theorise what's going on here, and I'm going to very briefly do this with the use of positioning theory. Positioning theory is a sociological, psychological theory of interaction. It emerges from role theory and frame theory, and key theorists in this approach are Rom Hare and Luc van Lagenhove, from whom the diagram on this slide is adapted. Positioning theory suggests that people interact at any particular moment in time based not so much on their roles, which we tend to think about as drama people, but more on how they are positioned or position themselves in relation to the person, thing, or institution that they are interacting with. More complex versions of the model shown here also suggest that these positions depend on constraints from things like perceived moral rights and duties. But in every case, human interaction is seen as a dynamic interplay between positions, actions, and storylines. If we look at those three terms a little more closely, positions are the things the identities that we adopt, the patterns of beliefs that are adopted in common by members of a relatively coherent speech community. That's to quote Hare and Mogadom. So positions are the identities that we adopt. The actions are the speech acts or other acts carried out to symbolize that position and to show our understanding of it. And the storylines are the ongoing storylines that people involved in the interaction are buying into, that make the positions and the actions that they're giving make sense. So, for example, in a research conversation, the position of researcher and researched carry with them certain actions or speech acts according to the storyline that is understood by the people in the interaction about how this would normally be done. What I like about this positioning triangle and the accompanying theory is that it is not itself a normative theory, but it acknowledges that people tend to be normative in their interactions. For example, there are not really heroes and victims. Those are constructions, but positioning theory acknowledges that in our interactions we construct these kind of normative identities. We construct stories about heroes and victims, and we position ourselves within those stories. It's a little difficult to really go into positioning theory in too much depth in the time that we've got here. But the test of a good theory is what happens when you lower it down over some data. So let's have a look at this photo again. If you consider this ordinary researcher on the right and this researcher in role on the left in terms of their positions, the researcher on the right is in researcher role. The child is a research subject. The identity of the researcher is university lecturer. She is positioned as a visitor to be respected and answered politely. Her actions are to ask questions and write things down as they are answered. And the storyline that's going along between the two people on the right of this photo is that of researcher, research subject. The researcher in role on the left has a different kind of set of identities and structures around her. She's positioned as a newcomer to the company, one who needs help to understand. Her actions are very different from those of the person on the right. She asks questions, true, but she also looks confused, handles the artifacts, asks for help and assistance. And the storyline here that is being accepted by everybody is that of apprentice teacher rather than researcher researched. Clearly, according to positioning theory, this is a very different relationship, and it's no wonder that the interactions that resolved are different. However, I want to suggest it doesn't stop there. Crucially, this isn't just a shift in position, it is also taking place in a dramatic role context. If we layer drama theory over the top of positioning theory, we can see something even more complex going on. One of the most important things about working in role is that it allows us to operate in a doubled reality, as Boal reminded us with the notion of metaxas, and as pictured in this image by Brian Edmiston. In drama and education, perhaps in any other form of, more than in any other form of drama, participants sit within two worlds, the if world of the imagined situation and the is world of the everyday classroom. In the case of the children in roles as archaeologists, there was the imagined world of the special digging company running alongside the everyday world of the classroom and the learning. As shown by the blue arrow here, the children are sitting in both at once. As Edmiston reminds us, the as-is world does not go away in classroom drama, it stays running alongside the as-if world. The formula for drama is not one in which the real world is deleted, but one in which a new reality is layered onto the present, ongoing, everyday world. So it's as-is plus as-if. And lots of research in drama education shows that children can transfer the learnings that they make in the if world across to the is world, and it works the other way too. What does this mean for researcher in role, however? Well, I think it's crucial. If we return to this picture with an awareness of the not just the positioning theory, but also the doubled reality of is and as if, we see something much more complicated happening. The researcher in role is in role as apprentice and researcher. She is positioned as a newcomer to the company, as one who needs help to understand, and as the researcher who needs to understand the learning. Her actions are to ask questions, look confused, handle the artifacts, and to prompt students to express their understanding. The storyline on the left is that of apprentice, teacher, and researcher students. So in other words, the positioning on the left of this picture is the same as on the right, and a whole other positioning is going on at the same time. Students and researcher are aware of both worlds, both realities running alongside each other. They are co-players in a game of pretend in which they are quite capable of holding two different positions and acting within two different storylines at once. This is what I think is exciting about bringing positioning theory and drama theories together and thinking about them in a research context. If positioning theory teaches us that roles, acts and storylines are inevitable in any interaction, drama offers a way of making these positions, storylines, roles and actions obvious, explicit. And in a research relationship, as in a classroom, by bringing roles, actions and storyline into consciousness, the rules can be understood and played around with a bit. My contention then is that researcher in role is a useful and important strategy that needs to be named and claimed. Reasons are on this slide. Firstly, researcher in role appears to offer a unique opportunity for operating within a dual reality with the children. Secondly, it allows the researcher to present authentically as mystified and therefore alter the discursive relationship without deceiving the children. This is a critical ethical issue as well as an issue of informed consent. The dual presence of the is and if worlds and the children's ability to sit between them appears to offer a natural structure for reflection and metacognition. If I spend some time in role with you as archaeologists, I can then step out of role and ask, so how was that? And finally, the fiction gives a concrete experience on which children can base abstract conceptions. So as researcher, I can also ask, and how did what we just did relate to real life situations? Does stuff like that really happen? And why is all this important? Well, researcher in role as a named and claimed strategy may offer the classroom researcher a whole new tool for generating data. That's very useful. It may also be an opportunity for some of the special qualities of drama education, some of the signature pedagogies, if you like, to be brought into mainstream research contexts. I think that's politically very important for drama. Also, researcher in role may offer advantages of a less tangible but arguably even more significant kind to young people and to the world. This quote from Hare is a very powerful one. He suggests that if we want to transform society, the place to do that is by working on the point where people generate the rules and acts that are constitutive of that society. The place for political action, he suggests, is on the rules. I think he's saying here that if we want to change the world, or at least our own societies, we need to look to the places where society's rules and roles are generated and played out. And where do we go to find people generating and playing out rules and roles? Well, one answer is classrooms. Of course, one of the key reasons that drama is so powerful is that it calls our attention to rules and assumptions that we hold and challenges us as participants to replay and change those. This is what Boyle's Forum Theatre and Heathcote's process drama is all about, rehearsing revolution. Another place in which rules and roles are generated, called to mind and critiqued is in research. Certainly as academics and teachers we're responsible for acts that are constitutive of institutions. So I'd like to suggest that properly theorised and sensitively used, the strategy of researcher and role could be important as part of shifting people's understanding about our relations and interactions. When I say people, I mean both the adults who currently research the world and the children themselves, our research subjects, who will shape it in the future. Thank you very much for watching and listening.